Kalorama, a recorded book's Highbridge imprint, presents What's Luck Got to Do with It? How Smarter Government Can Rescue the American Dream by Edward D. Kleinbard, read by Matthew Josdal. Publisher's note: this audiobook refers to figures and tables included in the print and ebook editions of the book. Introduction. Bad luck changes everything. This book asks you to think a bit more deeply about bad luck. Like gravity, brute luck is a universal force that cannot by itself be turned off. We like to think that we control our destinies through the decisions we make, but in fact, our careers and our happiness are shaped to a large extent by the consequences of luck, favorable or unfavorable, that are not only out of our control, but often are unobserved by us. Many successful people expend enormous energy denying this fact, but a franker acknowledgement of the importance of luck as a driver of people's outcomes leads to all sorts of salutary policy responses. In particular, the accidents of where, when, and to whom you are born casts a long shadow over your ability to develop fully your native skills and interests in order to lead a productive and fulfilling life. None of us has the luxury of choosing our parents, but all of us are affected throughout our lifetimes by the circumstances of our birth more than we might like to admit. Choosing your parents unwisely is a form of brute bad luck, which means bad luck that does not come from any gamble you consciously undertook. A cancer diagnosis or a car accident, at least if you are sober, also is an example of brute bad luck. Brute luck is randomness by another name, not poor life choices or unwise investments. One of Americans' central credos is that ours is a country that espouses equality of opportunity. Instantiating equality of opportunity, however, requires more than a collection of facially neutral statutes, or even the best of intentions. There is an irreconcilable conflict in American society today between our collective aspiration to live in a country that fully embraces equality of opportunity on the one hand, and our failure to grapple seriously with the inescapable role of the brute luck of where, when, and to whom we are born in determining our material outcomes. A shop-worn American trope maintains that feeding a man a fish keeps his belly full for a day, but teaching him how to fish keeps him fed for a lifetime. In practice, this is used to justify withholding handouts from the poor. Although we invoke it frequently, we do not take this trope seriously. If we did, we would teach a man to fish by sending him to a university for a graduate degree in fisheries management. Specifically, if we were serious about equality of opportunity, we would offer all Americans of comparable ability comparable investments in their human capital, in particular through education. Knowing that the different economic returns achieved by individuals in our modern, post-industrial, and globalized world are linked closely to the amount of education they are able to ingest. The United States today assures unequal distributions of human capital not attributable to differences in ability, and a resulting national shortage in total income-producing capacity, because we require that family resources play too large a role in the investments made in the human capital of individuals. Private investor markets do not and cannot adequately fill the gap, because one person cannot own the output of another. This market failure, in turn, erodes authentic equality of opportunity. We can, however, modulate the destructive impact of our excessive reliance on personal and family resources to fund adequate investments in a person's human capital by invoking the intermediation of government. Money, not systematic differences in virtue, thrift, intelligence, or diligence, explains the differences that are observed between the scions of the affluent and kids born to straitened circumstances. As one quick example, it is much easier for a mediocre student from a rich household to get into a top-tier college than it is for a talented student from a poor one. When we allow private funding to have an outsized role in access to education, we dishonor authentic equality of opportunity with respect to millions of our fellow citizens. In our modern post-industrial world, education, lots and lots of it, is the principal driver of lifetime earnings and many forms of lifetime satisfactions. Education is thus the engine of absolute material sufficiency, and access to education is the key to a society imbued with equality of opportunity. But this virtuous cycle breaks down when education is a market product, because to that extent, access to education becomes available only to those who start life with the resources to buy top-tier education, to sign up for every conceivable enrichment program, and to complete graduate or professional school debt-free, and with a nest egg to boot. The explosion of student loan debt is a symptom of the problem, not an instance of free markets providing a workable and equitable solution. It is a symptom of human capital investment demand, for which the supply mechanism we have fashioned leaves millions of Americans overburdened and unable to pursue the lives that fairness would dictate. Bad brute luck in where, when, and to whom we are born thus limits opportunity by choking off investment in the human capital of those facing the headwinds of these existential forces. The most pressing question that this book asks is, what policy responses might usefully follow from recognizing the heavy hand that bad luck places on the unlucky at birth among us? My answer is not simply to offer up a potpourri of big-ticket government programs for consideration, but rather to frame the problem and the solutions along the lines of the discipline of insurance, in both a commercial and a metaphorical sense. Insurance is an effective tool whose entire purpose is to mitigate the financial consequences of bad luck. It is a subtle financial instrument honed over the last 700 years, from the time of medieval Italian merchants forward to today. If equality of opportunity is the great organizing principle of American economic life, and bad brute luck the unresolved universal force that knocks too many people off course in their pursuit of their economic dreams, then the application of insurance principles is the response that can be used to make equality of opportunity more than a hollow phrase. I have no interest in simply cutting the rich down to size. I am, however, vitally concerned to offer every young person the tools she requires to fish, or to code, or to practice medicine or law. The only way to do this in the real world is to invoke the principles of insurance, to figure out what kinds of bad brute luck call out for the government to step into the shoes of an insurer, and then to apply those same principles in designing programs that respond most efficiently to the harms of these instances of bad luck. You probably drive an automobile. Once in a blue moon, you might have an accident. If the harm of the accident is only to your car, the remedy is simple. You call up your insurance company and arrange for the damage to be repaired at the insurer's expense. When you are confronted by a diagnosis of cancer, you also turn, if you are lucky, to your insurance to absorb the overwhelming financial costs of healthcare as it is practiced in America today. If you are over 65, you probably have insurance through Medicare, which is just a very large insurance company run by the federal government, for which you paid in part by premiums collected during your working career. About 150 million Americans are covered by private health insurers, with premiums collected beneath the surface in form of lower salaries, and with a very large hidden federal subsidy to boot. Alternatively, you might be one of the millions of working-age Americans without health insurance, because, for example, you do not have the good luck to work for an employer that provides health care as a benefit. You are indistinguishable from those who are covered, save for your bad luck, in living in a state that has not expanded its Medicaid coverage, or otherwise being able to buy insurance at a remotely affordable cost. You probably do not have a personal insurance policy to cover the financial consequences of every other calamity that might befall you. If you are more careful than most, and you live in California, you might, for example, have very expensive earthquake insurance. That covers the cost of rebuilding your home, but even so, you do not have insurance to cover the disappearance of your job, or the many other crushing blows that the big one would bring. When an earthquake, hurricane, tsunami, wildfire, or other natural disaster hits an area, we respond as a nation with disaster relief. We do so out of an understanding that all Americans are part of one organic community, and that bad luck writ large can devastate lives and communities for a generation or more. In these circumstances, we turn to our own government to function in effect as the insurer of last resort. Our reaction is not tantamount to asking for handouts, but rather an implicit invocation of standard principles of insurance as applied on a national scale. In the language of insurance, when it comes to mitigating the financial consequences of large-scale natural disasters, all Americans are in the same risk pool. The national commitment to mitigate financial loss following a disaster is one of many fundamental, unstated understandings that in the aggregate define us as a country and motivate our construction of what a government is good for. But now think about the still deeper kind of bad luck with which I began, the bad luck of not being able to choose your parents wisely. In the United States today, if you find yourself born into a family that is struggling financially, your own expected lifetime income and life satisfaction will suffer. No one's future is foretold at birth by wizards, warlocks, or crones, and bad luck deniers are always quick to point to the occasional poor kid makes good story as proof that birth circumstances are not very important in life, and to insinuate that other poor kids who do not make good must be victims of their own character flaws. But this overlooks the power of the word expected. At the instant of their births, all infants embark on the adventure of life with different mixes of native but undeveloped talents. Under no circumstances, however, do poor kids start life from the moment of their births with systematically inferior raw abilities or characters to those possessed by infants born into more comfortable circumstances. And yet, when examined as a group, kids growing up in financially straitened circumstances will systematically earn less as adults than will kids from more affluent circumstances. Moreover, when viewed from a national perspective, this systematic underperformance by adults who came from less advantaged backgrounds means that the economy will grow more slowly and that growth will be shared more unequally than if we grappled with the underlying dilemma that these instances of bad luck pose. When we drill down to individual circumstances, there will be a range of outcomes, including outliers in every direction. But the central tendency of the future adult earnings profiles of poor kids will be a materially lower income level than the same central tendency among kids from wealthier backgrounds once they also grow up. The word expected captures this difference in central tendencies and outcomes. Putting it another way, the relative income level of one's parents in the national distribution of incomes tells far more than it should about the income level that you are likely to achieve as an adult. As the first few chapters of the book develop, and as many of you probably also accept, the United States today is a bit of an economic enigma. The country grows richer from decade to decade, but Americans in the middle class or further down the economic ladder feel more and more squeezed. They grow angrier by the day over the unfairness they perceive at the root of the economic system. At the same time, even those at the top of the ladder acknowledge that the U.S. economy is growing more slowly than they would like. They argue that if only growth were marginally accelerated, the rising tide would lift all boats equally. The middle-class anger is justified, and a faster incoming tide would not be shared equally. Ironically, the structural economic problem that we face is the mere image of the traditional supply-side narrative that regularly pops up in the editorial pages of the Wall Street Journal. The fetishistic belief that all problems in American economic life stem from an undersupply of investment capital, money that businesses can use to buy the equipment or raw material they need to make stuff. In the United States today, this claim is preposterous on its face, as we have seen from the hundreds of billions of dollars of potential investment capital that U.S. firms have used in the last couple of years, not to reinvest, but rather to return to their owners through share repurchases or dividends. Investment supply-side cheerleaders today are trying to change our growth path by pushing on a string. The real supply-side crisis that we face is that we are systematically underinvesting in human capital, which in practice equates to education and to early life childcare. Almost two-thirds of our national income is attributable to labor, meaning the contributions of individuals, regardless of whether actual sweat is produced. In turn, the greater the investment in a person's education, through college or postgraduate degrees, the higher that person's lifetime income, and presumably her lifetime satisfactions as well. But because we do not make available sufficient public funds adequately to fund the development of all Americans' human capital, we allow the accident of where, when, and to whom we are born to constrain that supply, and in doing so, leave the unlucky among us without the tools necessary to lead a life of their own choosing that yields sufficient income and dignity for those individuals to flourish. As a result, our national income is that much the lower, and our growth that much the slower. Our systematic underinvestment in human capital chokes our economic output as individuals and as a country. That underinvestment, in turn, is driven by two factors: our refusal to acknowledge the pervasive presence of brute bad luck in our lives, and our great discomfort at relying on solutions to mitigate that bad luck that come from outside our free private markets. The result is to undercut one of the basic principles around which the American national identity is built. In this book, I endeavor first to remind listeners of the importance to us all of the credo of equality of opportunity. Second, to bring front and center as a policy concern the importance of brute luck in our lives, in particular, bad luck in where, when, and to whom we are born. And third, to articulate policy solutions that respond to this fact of nature, organized around actual or metaphorical forms of insurance. My presentation acknowledges how contingent our lives really are. That is, how we swim in a sea of luck, even when we are unaware of its forces. It then uses insurance as a product and metaphor to define where and how government is able to respond to bad luck in ways that enhance the lives of citizens and bind ourselves more closely to one another. Finally, it employs the insurance metaphor to design and explain the importance of the progressive income tax as the means by which these social responses are feasible. In every case, the reason for these interventions is to breathe life into our commitment to provide equality of opportunity to all Americans. In writing this book, I have tried my best to restrain my usual pedagogical zeal, which was fully on display in my prior book, We Are Better Than This: How Government Should Spend Our Money. This book stands on its own, but if you wish to pursue further some of the economic and social issues touched on here, for example, the different ways of measuring income inequality, or more extensive cross-country report cards, We Are Better Than This might be just the ticket. The endnotes here try to help by occasionally making explicit reference to it. Part 1. An overview of my argument. Chapter 1. Buffeted by the Winds of Fortune. Fortune's Wheel. I cycle regularly and have a standard 15-mile route that I follow a few times a week. On ordinary days, my time around the course does not vary by more than a minute or two. On some occasions, however, there is a strong headwind blowing down from the mountains. On those days, I push myself as hard as I can against the wind in my face, but despite my best efforts, I finish the route far behind my usual time. There are some fortunate days, though, when I feel that I am barely touching the pedals, and yet I fly through the route and finish at or near a personal record. Like every other cyclist, I've suffered through many tough headwinds, but don't ever recall feeling a tailwind. Our economic lives are the same. Brute luck that follows from impersonal forces whose consequences we have not invited, as in a gamble, is an important determinant of our material outcomes, clearly visible in the economic data. When that luck is consistently bad, most of those affected never achieve their full potentials. When our luck is unusually good, we behave like cyclists enjoying the wind at their backs. We believe that we can be distinguished from others entirely through our claims to superior talents, virtue, or dedication, not the good fortune of a tailwind to which we are insensible. Brute luck is an inescapable condition of the universe, like gravity. Fortune turns her wheel, wholly indifferent to our prayers, and without more care raises some up while casting others down. But as this book shows, we have available to us strategies to modulate the impact of bad brute luck through the mediation of government. By seizing those opportunities, we not only do right by our fellow citizens, but also set the country on the path to greater national income, more broadly shared. The pervasive impact of brute luck directly challenges our most cherished national economic myth, that every American enjoys economic opportunities for success at the career of her choice, equal to the opportunities available to all others. We particularly dishonor the meaning of equality of opportunity by ignoring the importance to our material prospects of suffering bad economic luck at birth. By this, I mean the negative financial consequences that are attributable to choosing the circumstances of our birth unwisely, to being born into poverty, or into a geographic area with limited public support for personal development, or at a time that means that we come of age in the midst of a recession. To this, I add bad luck in health, both because many instances of bad luck in health in fact have genetic components, and because our existing private health insurance markets are so conspicuously dysfunctional that a health crisis can often completely derail the financial prospects of an affected family. Chapters 3, 4, and 5 demonstrate that the consequences of bad luck at birth are evident in the data describing the economic life of affected individuals, as if they had been condemned to cycle into a perpetual headwind. This does not mean, however, that every child born into poverty is necessarily predestined to a life of economic failure. When fortune turns her wheel and randomly distributes bad luck in economic circumstances at birth, she leaves in her wake different expected values for the lifetime incomes, social mobility, and life satisfactions of the members of each group with similar quanta of good or bad birth luck. She does not, however, control every contingency in our lives, nor does she determine the personalities and characteristics with which we address these uncontrollable forces. This means that the actual outcomes of individuals with a similar allocation of existential luck will cluster around the expected value for that group, in what you might remember from high school math as the normal distribution, or one close to it, with most outcomes close to the expected value, but a few far to the left or the right of that. When luck deniers point to a rags-to-riches story to justify our current indifference to our fellow citizens and to our collective economic future, they mistake the outlier for the central tendency. Figure 1.1 might help to clarify my point. Technically, this distribution is not strictly normal, but rather skewed to the right. This reflects the fact that 0 is a hard lower bound on lifetime earnings, while the sky's the limit on the upside. In a case like this, the mean, average of the distribution, will be to the right of the median, middle of the pack figure. What the figure conveys is that actual lifetime earnings vary widely, but that the data are clear that the central tendency in outcomes of the unlucky at birth falls at a much lower point along the lifetime earnings continuum than that of those born into affluent circumstances. This is what I mean when I suggest that the economic milieu into which we are born is a strong predictor of our own expected economic outcomes. Birth and health luck set some of us on an easy economic path, and others on a difficult one. Chapters 3 through 5 explore the relevant research, but the key takeaway is that the data compel the conclusion that these instances of luck are an important determinant of the material outcomes that each of us achieves. These differences in outcomes, in turn, are driven by a handful of unassailable facts. First, in our complex modern world, our investments in our own human capital, particularly education and health maintenance, are the principal drivers of lifetime earnings. Education here is shorthand for policies that from birth encourage the flourishing of the child, including adequate parental leave and early childhood childcare in stimulating surroundings. Second, the United States is unique among developed countries in relying so heavily on private resources, which is to say oneself and one's family, to fund those investments in human capital. One of the great failures of our political discourse today is our insensitivity to the harms done by our excessive cheerleading for private enterprise and individual initiative, against this background of differential access to human capital investment. The conflict between today's relatively laissez-faire approach to bad economic luck at birth and in health on the one hand, and the myth of equality of opportunity on the other, is the core problem with which this book wrestles. It is true that someone, somewhere, can always overcome any obstacle, but that is not the right question. The right question is, why do we offer some of our fellow citizens a downhill trot to prosperity, while others are asked to run the same distance uphill with a sack of potatoes tied to their waists? From this follows all the philosophical, economic, and policy conundrums with which the book wrestles. Drilling down on brute luck. It is not easy to convince some people of the importance of brute luck in their lives, precisely because fortune's wheel turns for us all, and her outcomes are often invisible. It's like trying to convince a child that our atmosphere presses down on us at 14.7 pounds per square inch.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?